Hello, thank you for joining us in what is the second multimedia entry in our Pathways series. I'm delighted to say today I am joined by Chris Conroy, who is the Chief Data Officer at Future Anthem. Thanks for joining us today, Chris.
Thank you. Thank you.
For those of you who are familiar with the series, you'll know we kind of start in a very familiar way and then we'll kind of see where we get to along the conversation. So with that in mind, we will start in the same place we always do, which is by asking you if it was always a plan to get into the gambling industry. Where could your career have kind of gone down any other paths?
No, I definitely didn't envisage going how it's gone. It wasn't really a big plan to get into gambling, so I think, yeah, it could have gone a few different ways. Started off in finance. That was always my plan. Quite kind of studied maths and economics at uni and ended up in Jersey working in finance, HSBC, and that was the kind of career. And then after a while, I realised that that wasn't the career. Then I was in public transport for quite a few years, which is actually sounds really boring. It's actually really quite enjoyable from a kind of data and especially economics perspective. So now finance and public transport could easily have taken me, but yeah, I kind of ended up in gambling.
So what was it that eventually got you into the industry?
Just yeah, no, purely by chance. So I mean, like I was somebody who kind of enjoyed a bit of gambling in my spare time. Played a bit of poker at the time, but no, well, basically I was in a job quite happily in public transport, and my boss, who was like the commercial director, left the business and went to join a gambling company, and then a few months later I met him for a beer, and he was kind of started tapping me up a little bit, and yeah, so then very quickly ended up going for an interview, and suddenly I was working for a Rank Group. Well, at the time it was Rank Group, but yeah, Grosvenor Casinos. So I actually started off in the kind of quite funny because I've ended up very much in the digital space, but yeah, started off in the retail casino space, which was a really interesting place to be. That was in like 2011, so it just kind of yeah, retail was a really interesting place at that time because it kind of came through the smoking ban. It had taken a big hit after the smoking ban in the kind of, mid to late 2000s. And then Grosvenor especially had really probably got ahead of the game in the UK and saw the opportunity and maybe even necessity to change from these kind of like, smoky basements almost, which casinos in the UK were. Some of the regulations in the old days were like 24-hour period, so you had to go and register with them, and then you couldn't play for 24 hours. And that world kind of, I think, led to very small clubs with quite high spending customer bases. It wasn't a leisure experience. It was a very like it was an experience for a small number of people. And yet Grosvenor really saw the opportunity to change it into a leisure experience. They invested quite heavily in these really big leisure style venues, really nice big bars, big poker rooms. And I joined around the time where they really started to get data for the first time. They had implemented quite a widespread loyalty scheme, which I think they were the first casino in the UK. And suddenly they had all this data, and they started to really build out a kind of data function, which when I joined. So it was a really kind of interesting time. And then quite quickly after that, Grosvenor, put an acquisition offer in for their kind of like second biggest competitor, who was Gala Casinos. So suddenly we went from, suddenly having data from big data for the first time to, buying a competitor, went through monopolies, well, competition commission or monopolies and mergers, I can't remember what it was called at the time. So yeah, interesting time in the industry for sure.
And when you talk about that, you talk about the smoking ban and the challenges that cropped up with there, and then you kind of spoke about the role of data and kind of the progression and the path that it progressed along there. How key would you say that data played and like the loyalty scheme they put in place and gathering all that, in particular with the merger?
I mean, it was fundamental, right? Because again, back in the day, and people in the digital world just won't know anything about this, but back in the day in casinos in the UK, they actually tracked players manually, and casinos were so small, again in the early to mid 2000s, that they would track the high value or the high value players, majority of the players, and that's what they did. So they were literally writing it down on a piece of paper. Craig walked into the casino and they used to call it dropped £100, bought £100 of chips, and that's what they did. And then, as they started to develop these big leisure venues, then yeah, data was fundamental because there was also a key thing, regulation in the retail casino space. You can only open casinos in certain regulated places. So data was massive because it wasn't just about the loyalty card data that was coming in through like through the systems. It was also about should we open a casino in location X, and then you would have to get all this kind of like mapping style data to see, okay, what's the type of people that live around here? How similar are they to people that live around our current casinos? What would they be likely to spend if we invest, X million in this casino? Will there be a payback over the period? So I think that kind of period from like 2010 to 2015 in retail, it really was a bit of a data race. There was a bit of a race between like Crofton and Genting on, with these big leisure venues, it was about customer acquisition, customer experience, leisure experience, all driven and backed by like marketing and CRM. So again, really, really focused on data, understanding your customers, what offers, and it was all quite still, when we talked about offers getting sent out in those days, right, you were targeting people via data, but then they would actually get like a voucher dropped through their door. So, it was a bit of a crossover between the new digital world and the old kind of like retail world. So yeah, like it really drove, I think, the change in the industry and the retail space.
If we look at that change in the industry, and we take a step back and look at your own personal progression in a little while, but you look at you say you've been in the industry for quite a while, you've seen all these changes. What would you kind of assess as the kind of some of the changes are, looking at maybe the better and the worse?
I think data and the use of data is one of the biggest changes, and it's not even just the data and the use of data. It's probably the level of importance that people place on it. When I came into the industry, and this wasn't just in gambling, this was in most industries. Like it was just another thing. You had data and you had operations, you had marketing, you had all these other things. And I think, obviously with the rise of the big e-commerce and social content brands from like 2000 onwards, suddenly, and I've talked about this a lot in the past, like it was this concept of like machine learning coming out of these like laboratories and places like Berkeley and actually into the commercial world, and that happened in Silicon Valley in the early 2000s or the late 90s, in fact, and for industries like ours, everybody caught up eventually. So data has been massive, and that is probably the biggest change. And I think everybody knows I think that's a change for both the better and the worse. On the better side with data, I think it's great. We're better at understanding players, personalising, targeting. On the worst side, if I'm honest, I think we've still got within the industry in general. I think there's still a long way to go in terms of understanding how to manage data, how to use data. So I think that still provides a challenge. And I think the other big thing is obviously regulation. And it's not really regulation. I think it's better to say the understanding of player behaviours and players who may be, displaying signs of risk. And that shouldn't be about regulation per se. I mean, for sure, regulators are going to have a big part to play in that, but really that should be about, all of us in the industry just understanding that and using things like data to get better at managing, those potential risks. And I think, that has been a massive change. I think the biggest positive change in the industry has been a real crossover from the management of problems, which it was when I entered the industry. It was if somebody's identified a problem, that's something that has to be managed and controlled. And it's really moved, I think, from the management of problems to the always finding problems before they start. And that's obviously what we're using data for within the kind of safer play world. It's about, predicting risk before it happens, finding early signals of risk. So again, I think these are actually real positives.
I know from when we spoke previously in London not too long back, the whole safer gambling conversation was one thing that you spoke quite passionately about for quite some length. And I know one thing you really emphasised was this necessity to kind of put safer gambling through kind of every aspect of a company, every operation, every division that this company may have, and not just have kind of this separate safer gambling team that's responsible for it, but to really embed that throughout every company across the industry. I was thinking if you could kind of elaborate a little bit on that and explain just why that is so key.
Yeah, I mean, I think that what you just mentioned there is fundamental, and I think when we are in the industry and out various clients and not just clients at events like ACE and catching up with everybody, I think we see a lot of operators moving in this direction. So I think the concept is again like previously and a number of years ago, you would have this a compliance team over here that's theoretically responsible for player safety and almost your commercial and operational teams over there. And when you think about it, it doesn't make any sense, right? Because if your commercial and operational teams are responsible for your website, for your player experience, for your marketing, then how can you possibly have a compliance team sitting over here that's responsible for player safety? Because player safety has to manifest itself on your website, within your player experience, within your marketing. But yeah, I think we do see a big shift there, and I think definitely the operators that are starting to win in the market, and I think definitely the operators that are really starting to focus the most in this area have done this already, right? They've really pushed all these things together so that they don't have this whole concept of compliance sitting outside of the business, and really they have moved to much more integration, and I think that's how it has to be. The person who's responsible for player safety needs to be really close to your marketing team because they are the people who are communicating with customers, and they need to be really close to the people who are driving on-site experience because that's where the customers are playing. So I think just integrating all those things in terms of your operation is fundamental.
We've kind of looked at a lot of different issues here. I'd like to kind of take a step back, like I mentioned a few minutes ago, and take a look at maybe your own personal journey. How would you assess your personal journey through the industry?
Uh, I think, in common with many people who somehow find themselves in a kind of at a half decent position eventually, like one interspersed with a lot of luck. And I'll be honest, not a great deal of planning. So I think it was just kind of one of those people that just sort of joined a company at the right time, and kind of almost things happened in quite a good way. So I joined initially Grosvenor Casinos. I think, as I mentioned, we quite soon after that acquired, Gala, which were our, second biggest competitor. So almost immediately that was a bit of an elevation because I went from a role that was looking after, 35 casinos and the data analytics around that to like 55 casinos within a period. Unfortunately, I had to go through a kind of 18-month to 2-year process with the Competition Commission. And interestingly, I just went through that process in my previous job, so I do wonder whether the main reason that the person we talked about poached me across was simply because of my competition commission experience. But yeah, and then once we'd done that whole kind of like Gala thing, which was a really interesting world. At one point, we had like the Grosvenor database here and the Gala database here, and we were trying to run kind of integrated marketing, and we were having to do a lot of work in the background to keep it all joined up, which was, that was how things were around 2013. And then, there was a big new push to then get Grosvenor to be an established brand online. So again, Grosvenor had been a really small brand online, whereas within the Rank portfolio, you had Mecca and Blue Square that were really big online brands. So then there was a big move into building out the Grosvenor brand. They brought in a whole new, like, very experienced digital team over in Gibraltar. And given where I was sitting within retail and looking after the data, I kind of just almost then moved into a role that also encompassed Grosvenor Digital, which started off very small. But again, with that really experienced operational team over in Gibraltar and marketing team, like, started to grow very quickly. So I kind of grew through that, and again, really fortunate for me because I'd never worked in digital before. So suddenly I kind of a whole digital experience, and I think then from there, just we then went through a few different evolutions. And then I think at one point, there was a step back. We were very much in an old-fashioned data analytics world, managed to secure some kind of internal investment to build out a data science function. So yeah, kind of in a role that started off with 35 retail casinos, ended up with a kind of a machine learning team and a massive like Azure data platform. So yeah, I guess that's how it goes. And left once I left that role, I was actually on my way out of the industry. I guess I know a few people have been in this position where you feel like you've done your thing, and I felt like I'd built a data science function in the gambling industry, and it might be quite fun to try it elsewhere. But a bit like the old line, just when I thought I was out, they pulled me back in. So yeah, kind of on the way out of the industry, and I bumped into Lee, who's our CEO and founder, and kind of had a bit of a chat, pitched with this vision about this kind of like gambling data business that he was in the process of building, and yeah, I guess here I am now.
And to end, we'll end as we always end in these features, which is to say, if you could ask, we normally say the 100 Club or just the industry in general, if you could task them with one question, what would that question be to the industry?
Why are we not better at technology?
It's a great question. Thanks a lot for your time today. I really appreciate it.
No problem. Thanks very much.